Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw a massive second week showing for the Super Mario Brothers movie, and I can now say definitively the movie is going to cross $1 billion. It has not done so yet, but at this point I will say I am conceding the bet. I am conceding the race with Jeremy, because it is essentially an inevitability that this movie is going to cross $1 billion based off of the metrics that we currently have. Keeping in mind as well that this film has yet to release in certain countries, which even though there are many people, including in the comment section of this channel, in addition to the Geeks and Gamers channel, that don't quite understand how the Japanese or South Korean box office works, it is not released in those countries, and so we are definitely going to see probably about 150 to 100, probably somewhere between 100 and 200 million dollars from both countries combined. And there's a reason as to why I think that it's not going to get that much more than that from those two countries combined, by showing you actual historical data about what films do well there, and how even some of the biggest box office films in history have not been able to crack the Japanese box office, especially, let alone the South Korean one, which is tends to be a little bit more friendly towards Western films, especially big budget, big performing Western films. But Japan, not nearly as impressive there. And so before you start going off about Japan and South Korea, I got some news for you. But before we go any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, slap that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on. That way you know every video live stream goes live on the channel. So, Nancy, good old Nance from Deadline, has the news for us here, saying, coming in higher than Saturday's projection for the full sophomore weekend, Illumination / Nintendo / Universal Western, the Super Mario Brothers movie has barreled its way to an estimated $678 million global. Of that, $330 million coming from the international markets. It made $94.1 million from 71 markets where it is currently operating, with just a 28% drop. So an insanely good drop for this movie. And by insanely, I just mean that it's a very, very good drop just by any standard whatsoever. You add in addition to that the fact that it didn't lose much of anything in the domestic release, only dropping 41%, much better than the 50 to 60% that was being projected by some places, including Deadline, earlier this week. This is just downright a huge success for Universal. The film has already made well north of $200 million, probably close to $250 million in net gain profit, and is projected to probably make somewhere around $500 million in net gain profit when everything is said and done, based off of just typical standards. And so this film is doing insanely well. Again, $87 million, easily winning the weekend. I do appreciate that Universal tends to put their numbers out much more quickly than studios like Disney, and I can see totally why, especially with most recent films being released where Universal has been making a lot of money in various countries, whereas Disney has not been. But let me talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, which of course is the people who don't understand the Japanese or South Korean box office. So let's first off talk about Japan, all right? Let me give you a little bit of a reference here, all right? So anime film, Jujutsu Kaisen, right? A very big release and a very successful release for the Japanese market. Even Jujutsu Kaisen, right, an anime, only made $108 million back in 2021 from the Japanese market. And again, that's a very strong number, especially for the Japanese market. But this is an anime. This is from Japan directly. You have actual Japanese studios behind it. You're actually producing it. So a Japanese release, Japanese film doing this kind of money. This makes a lot of sense to me. This is an anime film doing very well. You then also have another film in Demon Slayer, the movie Mugen Train. Now, this is what got a lot of attention worldwide, because this film ended up breaking records, not just in certain countries, but even in Japan itself, making $364 million back in 2020. So obviously, both of these films I'm talking about are before you even adjust for inflation. But these are films doing incredibly well in this country, right? So $100 to $300 million is what a homegrown film, what again, a Japanese release coming here from Aniplex, and you can, again, add even more to the fact that, again, this is coming from actual Japanese producers, doing incredibly well here in this country. Now, let me try to show you what happens when you have a Western release in a place like this. First off, let's talk about South Korea, all right? Avatar 2, The Way of Water. Film I hated, right? And this is a movie, though, that still did incredibly well. Made over $2.3 billion worldwide. This film in South Korea made $105 million. So I think if anyone's going to talk about this film, talking now about Super Mario Brothers, is going to bring in a crap ton of money from South Korea alone, you have to first take into account this, right? Avatar: The Way of Water brought in $105 million from South Korea. Do you really think the Super Mario Brothers film is going to be able to bring in as much as one of the biggest box office releases of the last 5 years? It's a question that needs to be asked, and I don't think really there's a lot of data to support the film doing nearly as well. And if you're going to try to argue saying it's not a Western movie, or it's like a hybrid of a Western film because, Nintendo was involved, and Nintendo is a Japanese company, and so therefore because they were working with them and they were working with the creators and the minds behind Mario, that's what's going to make a difference. It's not, though. Because ultimately, you have several films, I think Avatar might even be one of them, where you do have Asian production companies that are a part of the actual process. It does not make, ultimately, though, a difference in these countries. And I'll show you why, especially talking about Japan, which is the one that a lot of people tend to bring up more so than South Korea. But notice how you see in Avatar: Way of Water, it made $105 million in South Korea. What numbers do you think it made in Japan? Well, it only made $32 million in Japan. So again, for a Western film, that's actually very, very good. But this goes to show you that just because the film is, again, this film, especially Avatar: Way of Water, was a huge financial success, did gangbuster numbers in various places, did not really make that much of a mark in Japan. You go back to the original Avatar film, right? Most people look at this as being, again, literally the biggest, right, of box office releases before you adjust for inflation, of course. But even the original, and because this is unadjusted numbers, it made $170.6 million in Japan. All right? So I had some people who were saying it's going to make $200 to $300 million, Super Mario Brothers film. There's just no real metrics that you can point to say that that's going to be a possibility, right? It's not an anime coming directly from the country, which do incredibly well there. And so, therefore, all you can do is say, okay, let's compare it to Western films. And you know what? Let's compare it to the most successful Western films in most markets and in most countries of all time. Avatar 2, I think, are great examples of that, showing you, again, maybe the highest end that you could really think of in these markets. Even this film, Avatar 1, only made $170 million. Let's go ahead and try to pull up the South Korean numbers just to give you a mindset of what it did here. In South Korea, it only made $108 million. So it's kind of insane when you think about how much it made in those countries. And again, you do have to adjust for inflation, as I, again, do for all films, because I think it's the only fair way that you can really look at it. But you are still seeing, I think, hopefully, why to think that the Super Mario Brothers film is going to add a crap ton of money, anything more than $200 million together, right? Both Japan and South Korea. And I think that's being incredibly fair, especially when you're looking at these two Western releases in Avatar 1 and Avatar 2 and how well those films did in that market. And the fact that you also have in Super Mario Brothers film a delayed release, which I think will impact its box office there because you still have pirating available in that country, just like you have here. It's like when you have films that have delayed releases that get released here in the United States, the films don't do nearly as well, because either it's getting very close to a physical release or because of the fact that you do have piracy that does happen. But hopefully now you have a better idea about why I do not think Super Mario Brothers film is going to get anywhere close to what some of the people are saying it's going to make in South Korea or Japan. I think Jeremy probably has one of the better takes on this, to be perfectly honest. He said that he could see it making upwards of $150 million in Japan. And though I think that's a possibility, again, the fact that you see Avatar: Way of Water only getting $32 million and then the original Avatar itself, doing just only marginally better in this country. Again, I think that you need to keep in mind and keep track of the fact that the film is a Western film, and Western films, even films like Super Mario Brothers with a name like Mario, is not guaranteed to do the numbers that people are saying that it will. All right, so Super Mario Brothers, though, still doing incredibly well, guaranteed to make $1 billion, so it doesn't matter. Right? It shouldn't matter to anyone. Some people are still going to get triggered by that, but still, right? It doesn't need to do well in Japan. It doesn't need to do well in South Korea, because guess what? It's going to make $1 billion without those countries. You add to those countries, and now you're just adding to its overall total. That's why I think $1.1 to $1.2 billion is probably a likely endpoint for this movie. But we'll get into that once we get into the actual charting. The Pope's Exorcist came in at the number 2 spot. This film had already gotten an international release, and so that is the reason why, if you look into its entire total, it's over $35 million worldwide at this point. It needs to make about $45 million or so to break even, and I think that America, the United States, and just, again, the entire domestic market is going to be able to help provide those needed funds. I'm kind of interested to see how much impact the interview that Russell Crowe had with The Critical Drinker, how much of an impact that may have had on its box office, if it actually was able to help it in the domestic market. But it's really hard to always gauge that kind of mindset. But I have to imagine more people know about that film because of that interview than they would have had without it, because Critical Drinker is not only an awesome channel, but also a very large personality on the YouTube sphere. John Wick Chapter 4 came in at the number 3 spot, dropping from the number 2, dropping another 45% here. Again, $7.9 million, so continuing to add to it. It's made around $350 million worldwide at this point in time, so doing very well, but still slowing to the point where I don't know if it's going to be able to pass up the entire worldwide box office for John Wick Chapter 3, but we will continue to follow that and probably won't do a full breakdown of that until we have the final number here because, as you all know, I want to adjust those numbers accordingly. The film Renfield is not doing well. It's one of the few Universal films, it seems, that is not doing very well. This film made $7.7 million, has not gotten very good reviews. Jeremy Jahns even said you would like this if you were drunk, and he is someone that very much appreciates Nicolas Cage. But yeah, because of the budget of the film, especially around $65 million, and it not doing well here or internationally, I don't see this film being able to make its money back, but we'll, again, wait for those week 2 numbers to drop. What we can say is the Amazon Studios film, Air, for those that maybe don't know, the film cost $90 million to make. That's before Amazon got involved. Amazon then bought the rights to the film for around $120 million. Then, of course, because Amazon owns it, spends extra money to give it some marketing, right? So probably close to, $50 million or so for marketing if you take typical standards. So that means that the movie needs to make probably north of $300 million worldwide to break even. And it's only made $33 million here domestically. Now, in my charting, I use the $90 million production budget to be as fair as possible to the movie. So if even that metric has the film close to $100 million in projected losses, you take into account the real numbers based on how much Amazon actually spent on the rights and on marketing. And it's a massive $100+ million financial loss for Amazon Studios. And hey, couldn't happen to a nicer company. And I remember, and if you've been watching these box office breakdowns for a long time, you'll remember that over at Deadline, they tried to argue that Air's release was amazing because it showed a shift in the overall view of streaming services and starting to open up to the possibility of releasing their films in theaters. I can't help but point out that, okay, if that is what you were excited about, these numbers show, oh, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't release our films in theaters because of how little money we're actually getting as far as return on investment is concerned. Dungeons & Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves is still hanging around $7.3 million, still not going to be enough to make its money back. Suzume, a wonderful new release in the domestic market, already had its international release. This is another one of these Japanese anime films. Very, very good from the same director. I talked about this on the last stream on Saturday night. So Makoto Shinkai did this film. He also did Your Name and Weathering with You, and very, very talented filmmaker. Not my favorite of his movies, but still a solid film nonetheless. Made $5 million here domestically, so pretty impressive considering, again, 2,000 screens and the fact that it is one of these more obscure titles that people are not necessarily going to see. Then you have Bleecker Street's Mafia Mama. That's right, there is a film called Mafia Mama that got released, and yeah, it's not doing much of anything. No projected budget yet, so I can't say whether it's going to be a loss or not, but if I had to guess, I would say probably is. Scream 6 starting to leave a lot of theaters, so probably has pretty much made all it's going to make, but hey, still adding to its overall profits. The film Nefarious, and I know a lot of people want me to see this movie. I have tickets to go see it tonight, but because of my wife's pregnancy, some nights she is, wanting to watch a movie and then she's not feeling well enough. So I may end up having to push this to Monday. So I'm either going to see Nefarious tonight or tomorrow, and I'll have a review up on the channel. But we have no actual production budget being given for the film, and so I can't say this film is doing well or not. I would have to guess it's not doing well because I don't think this is a micro-budgeted film. And because this film probably costs north of $5 million or around $5 million, let's just say even at that number, it is not looking good at all for it. You then have other films that did not make it on the ranking, but I figured I'd mention. You have the film Sweet Water, which I don't really know much about. The film Champions hanging around. Beau is Afraid from A24. A24 continuing to do its weird releases, right? This film basically got a New York, LA release schedule. So one that the trailer looks interesting at the very least. Puss in Boots hanging around, and you have a bunch of other films too that are hanging out as well. Going into the international box office, the Super Mario Brothers movie at $677.9 million. Again, very, very impressive there, and guaranteed to make $1 billion at this point in time. Pope's Exorcist, because it's already made $27.4 million internationally, adding to it domestically, meaning that this film is well on its way to hit its own break-even point. John Wick Chapter 4 at $349 million worldwide. So again, very impressive numbers there. We'll go ahead and do this live because I think it is important for us to give a little bit of context here. So comparing this film to John Wick Chapter 3, as I said, I don't think the movie is going to be able to pass John Wick Chapter 3, which up to this point has been the highest grossing of the John Wick the John Wick franchise. If we go and compare these films, John Wick Chapter 3 made $373 million worldwide when you adjust for inflation. This, of course, is using an imperfect inflation calculation, but still nonetheless important to mention. Whereas here for John Wick Chapter 4 is at 349. So it's still going to add more to its money, but I think it's going to come in underneath where John Wick Chapter 3 was. And even though it still has made its money back and it's still making profits, the fact that the film costs twice as much and is likely to come in underneath John Wick Chapter 3, not really the best look overall, I will say. Renfield at $10 million is set to be a box office flop. Air as well, $54 million after 2 weeks, set to be a gigantic flop for Amazon. Dungeons & Dragons at $157 million did better than what had been expected, but not good enough. Suzume is at $261 million because, again, it got the international release early. Mafia Mama only at $2 million. That poster itself looks already... Actually, when I pulled up this picture on the numbers, I couldn't help but think, wow, that looks incredibly photoshopped. It almost looks like she wasn't even in the chair and they just put her face onto someone else's body. That's how bad it looks. Can't see this film doing much of anything. Scream 6 adding to its overall budget. And then the film Nefarious at $1.3 million. Again, no reported budget, so I can't say whether the film is a success or not. Going into the charting, because we love charting here, no budget reported for Suzume, so I can't say whether the film is a success or not, affirmatively, but based on the fact that these films tend to cost somewhere between 10 and 50 max $1 million to make, I can't help but imagine the film is, well, again, already made its money back and just adding to its overall profits. The Pope's Exorcist, because it did get a delayed release, we won't be able to do our typical box office tracking for it, but right now it's only $5 million in the red, and I suspect that it will cross that probably even by either next weekend or the weekend after and be able to say it has made its money back. Can't say the same thing for Renfield, which is at $91 million of a financial loss at this point in time. Do not see that film being able to recoup that investment. Now let's go ahead and talk about the week 2 numbers, though. These are films that we can make some projections on at this point in time. So based off the fact that it's made $677.9 million at this point in time, Super Mario Brothers film has made around $256 million in net gain profits. Based on that 2-week number, you're looking at the film making somewhere between $968 and $1.3 billion. Now, I could already hear people saying, well, Japan and South Korea. I already mentioned those films, all right? And that's one of the reasons why. Combined together, if both of those countries give a total of around $200 million to this film, then you can see why that projection is already going to creep up to at least $1 billion. That's why I'm saying the film is already guaranteed $1 billion even without Japan and even without South Korea, because the average, this is if a film has some pretty decent legs. The fact that this film only dropped 43% or so domestically, dropped in the 20s internationally, this film has incredible legs. And so this film is going to at least get to $1.1 billion, maybe to $1.2 billion when all is said and done. We'll have to wait for those numbers to come out, but those are the numbers that I am projecting at this point in time. That means for overall profits, it's going to be somewhere between $430, probably $450 million minimum, to around $660, maybe even $700 million net gain profits when you do take into account those eventual releases in countries like South Korea and in Japan. Because again, it's going to do well there, but it's not going to be doing as crazy as people might think it is going to, because again, a lot of people don't understand Western films in the Asian markets and how they don't do nearly as well. We could also make projections on the film Air. Right now, I'm projecting it to make somewhere between $77 and $108 million worldwide. But when you take into account even just the $90 million budget, which remember, this is being incredibly fair because we know that we know that Amazon spent well over $120 million for the rights and then an extra 50 or so on marketing. So yeah, you're looking at this film, minimum $100 million loss for Amazon. So yeah, let's just say the film is probably going to push them to not want to do other future theatrical releases. Dungeons & Dragons, again, at the number that it's in, is still going to be a financial loss. I don't remember if I was actually able to do the update here, but let me go ahead and add to that, just try to keep it there, $157,000, $157 million. So as you can see, it is still, again, doing better than what had been expected, but even now, it's still outside of that zone, right? The underlined, bolded number means that it's a chart breaker, either in the positive or the negative. Right now, this is in the negative, and again, still going to be a massive financial loss, probably a $100 million loss for the company. John Wick Chapter 4 is at $59 million in net gain profits, so again, getting to the minimum number there, and it's going to, again, somewhere in the average range for where this film is going to end up, but I don't see the film getting to $400 million at this point in time. Shazam 2 is pretty much done, and so $100 million flop for Warner Brothers. Couldn't happen to a nicer company. And the last of the major films to get updates for was Scream 6, which is now at $47 million in net gain profits. So as you can see, getting into that historical norm there. So really not all that surprised by those numbers. But those are the numbers as they currently stand. What are y'all's thoughts about any of the films that I talked about? Obviously, a ton of new releases. And unfortunately, most of them don't have any budgets. And so that, of course, drives me crazy. But the big news, of course, is Super Mario Brothers film and how I'm essentially conceding, saying this film is guaranteed to make $1 billion. Again, if you take into account the fact that it has not yet released in Japan and in South Korea, and it's probably going to get at least $200 million from both of those countries combined, you're looking at the film, again, getting at least $1 billion, maybe upwards of $1.2 billion when all is said and done. And hey, who knows? In a couple weeks, if those numbers come out and they are performing as well as a Jujutsu Kaisen or even as a Demon Slayer, I just don't see that happening though. But let's say it does. What if? Then you could talk about this film getting upwards of maybe even 1.3 to 1.5 billion. But we'll have to wait for those numbers to come out. And as we wait for those numbers, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, that fire button, and smash the rumble button as well. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members who are at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with Patreon with Father Luca Illick, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange at Reviews, who you can check out over at his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel at Eagle Writer, and Miss Modern Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my Subscribe Star people, we got Matt317, check him out on his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and the K-Man, and you can check out the K-Man over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my Locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. If you want your name shouted at the end of every video and live stream, check out the top link in the video description below to join the Keeper of the Bifrost level. You also get access to other things like a podcast that I do every month with John the Flickinger, and also I do giveaways for my Keeper of the Bifrost level people and above, and also my Chosen of Valhalla monthly stream. If any of that stuff sounds interesting, especially those giveaways, which I do give away 4K steelbooks, all kinds of stuff all month long, check out that top link. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Easter, and as always, God bless.